live. Now we are just waiting for our guest. All right, we have Z, we have Alex in here.
Awesome. Welcome in, guys.
Waiting for a few more. Nice. Z is from Georgia. Okay. Started in a few minutes.
Yeah, give it about 5, I'd say, right?
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, welcome in, Stephen.
Right. Hello, Stephen. Welcome in. Okay, well, I guess I can get started with the intro.
Absolutely.
So,
Sounds good.
Welcome to our Webinar Wednesday series, guys, at CyberData Pros. My name is Kylie, and I'll be hosting this event today. I also have Matt Sherrard, who is a data privacy and security analyst here at CyberData Pros, and Corey Cienza, who is one of our senior data privacy and security analysts. Today, we'll be discussing SOC 2, what it is, and why it's important for your business.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Kylie. I appreciate it. For me, this is a really exciting topic. And honestly, this is a topic we get a ton of questions about from clients. So I think it's a really great thing for us to kind of sit down and discuss, get some questions and feedback from other people as well. So for everyone here joining, definitely don't be afraid to say hello, ask some questions, and definitely interact with some of the polls that we've got coming up that we have set for you.
Yes. Once again, thank you for the introduction, Kylie. But I just want to echo everything that Corey said. I know that we'll have some really good discussion here. I know that me and Corey both are going to have some interesting thoughts on SOC 2, the SOC 2 process, and we're excited to talk through the basics of it with you guys.
Great. I'll get started with the first question. So why don't we start with an overview of what SOC 2 is for anyone who might not know?
Yeah, sure. I can get started with that. So SOC 2 is sort of a quick, dirty overview. So SOC is a service organization control, is what it stands for. And that's important to note, that service organization control, because it does kind of help define what SOC is meant to do and how it works. So essentially, SOC 2 is a framework that outlines organizational controls over a set of 5 different service principles that companies are adhere to or strive to better themselves for. It's created by the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants, which is a bit odd. It seems a bit odd on the surface, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. And those main 5 service principles are sort of the real meat and potatoes of what SOC 2 is about. Those are going to be security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy of customer data. So when you take all those 5 combined, you get this framework that's designed to really dive in on safeguarding data, both client and internal, and it's really designed to help bolster security posture from the most practical standpoint as possible. And I think an important thing I mentioned already a couple times is that word framework. I'm sure Matt will say this at least one time later today, but SOC 2 is not a certification. And it's really important to note that it is a framework and it is an attestation. So with that framework, rather than a prescriptive certification, that allows SOC 2 to be very, very flexible, which is why it's such a good tool to have and to use as part of your security posture.
Yeah, and I just want to follow up on that with a little bit. Just kind of hit I think Corey did a great overview there. I just want to hit kind of the key aspect again, that it is an attestation report by an auditor. It is not a certification, and it's not a pass or fail. It is a little bit more complex than that, and it's going to provide a lot of detail about the security posture of your organization for your clients or for regulators to look at. But yeah, I think you did a great job with the overview.
Thank you. And it is important to note as well, we say SOC 2 as a singular item. It is important to note that there are different types of, obviously, there's SOC 1, SOC 2, SOC 3, but even within SOC 2, there are different types as well. There's SOC 2 Type 1 and SOC 2 Type 2, which do operate a bit differently, but they, at the end of the day, they are still frameworks. They still apply to everything I said, but there are different types.
All right, that leads into my next question. I know you just mentioned SOC 2 Type 1 and SOC 2 Type 2. Could you elaborate on how they're different?
Yeah, I think I'll start off with this one. So SOC 1 Type 1 and SOC 2 Type 2, the biggest difference is that the best way to give an overview of how they're different is that SOC 2 Type 2 is going to be far more comprehensive than SOC 2 Type 1. SOC 2 Type 1 is going to be just a snapshot in time. It's going to be evaluation of your controls, of your policies that you have put in place, whereas the SOC 2 Type 2 is going to evaluate the effectiveness of those controls over time. So it's not just going to look at how they work in theory. It's going to be how they work in practice, and how you as an organization keep those controls in line with the state security posture of your organization and the security posture that you assert to your auditor as well. And the interesting thing about SOC 2 Type 2 is that it takes place over different windows of time depending on how you scope it out. It could be a 3-month assessment of the effectiveness of your controls, but it can also be up to a year. And the length of time is going to be something that's really dependent on the maturity of your organization. The longer the time window you give, of course, the better of a attestation you can give to your customers, and that's going to just really show the maturity of your security posture. And so you're going to end up having, when you look at the two different types, you're going to end up having very similar reports, but you're going to end up having a Type 2 report is going to be a lot more detailed on the effectiveness of how each of those controls work and how they how you actually implement them and how effective they are in your security posture based off what you've already told the auditor.
Right. Yeah, honestly, that's a perfect summation too. And just to kind of drive that point home, the way I like to look at it, or the way I like to describe it in simplest terms, is a Type 1 report is a picture, it's a snapshot of your business and its practices all in one specific time. So a Type 1 report is going to say, this is what we do. It really is just sort of outlining everything. Whereas a Type 2 takes that a step further. It takes that single point in time and it observes all those controls, all those things that you're saying, hey, this is what we do. We're going to observe those over a period of maybe a year, and we're going to see how well they actually work. So Type 1 is more for, here's what we do. Type 2 is here's how we prove that it's working.
Yeah, it's a lot going to be on the proof and showing that over. Again, it's about time. It's going to be a lot more. I would say, I don't have the correct reason, but invasive from the auditor's perspective. You're going to have to be able to demonstrate again and again that you do it every day.
Right.
Nice. So could one of you explain the contents of a SOC 2 report, since you mentioned that the reports for type 1 and type 2 are alike?
Yeah, I can take care of some of that for you. So there, in general, there are different ways to sort of categorize or talk about, what is part of a report. You can talk about what is included in the report itself, or sort of what does a report cover. As far as what the report covers, what it's about, there are really 5 sort of major components in a SOC 2 report. And the first is going to be obviously those 5 principles that I already mentioned. Those are going to be our trust service criterias, or what's 5 principles we call the trust services criteria, sometimes referred to as trust service principles. Both are used interchangeably. One, I think the principles is technically the older verbiage of that, but there's really no worries about using either. But those 5 principles being that security, availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. Those are what SOC 2 strives to actually test against, and strives to show where your business is strongest in its security posture. The second component out of the 5 is sort of the criteria. So this is the actual reporting on each one of those principles. So each one of those principles on that report is broken down into 61. If you're looking at all of those principles as applies to your scoping, breaks down into 61 different sub criteria. So under each one of those categories, you have the different sub criteria that you are able to show controls and progress and focus on. Within, as part of those sub criteria, the third part is your points of focus. Now, for the security principle, which I'm not sure if you mentioned already, but I think we'll probably get that later when we talk about scoping. Security principle is the only one that is a basic requirement of SOC 2. Within that security principle alone, there are actually 200 different points of focus that a SOC 2 report focuses on and strives to bring to light, and so you can show to your clients. When you look at all the principles, if you were to scope out something that included all 5 principles, there would be a total of 290 points of focus. And those points of focus are there to really assist both you and your auditor for as far as identifying and documenting all the controls that are in place and that are actually being tested. Definitely important to note that not each and every one of those focus criteria are required, but since they are there to guide you and your auditor, it's always good to keep in mind that those are the things that are going to be focused on during that audit. So having as much of that covered as possible, whether it be in specific, individual circumstances, or just really in spirit, or showing that you're working toward those, it's really good to keep in mind. Fourth thing that I like to break it down into is the controls itself. So SOC 2 in the security mechanism alone is 80 to 110 controls, which sounds like a lot, but honestly, it's not nearly as daunting as it sounds. But these controls are essentially just what it sounds like. These are the actual things you're doing that are going to satisfy those sub criteria. So, for example, as part of the security, the security criteria or principles, you could say, hey, we have our DLP set up in Google Workspace. So we have that data loss prevention that's stopping data from leaking through the organization or coming out through emails. That's a control. And the 5th part is evidence. So evidence, again, self-explanatory, is how you intend to prove or show that those controls are implemented. So, simple as, screenshots of that interface showing that DLP is enabled, being able to say, hey, I tried to send an email with a social security number and Google kicked it back, something like that. So that is going to be the 5th and last sort of major component about what SOC 2 covers and how it's audited. As far as the actual paper report itself, or digital report itself, how it's going to be broken up is listed. Your major components are going to be the opinion letter. Opinion letter, essentially, you want to break it down as your results. So you can have one of 4 opinions, one being unqualified, one being qualified, one being disclaimer, and one being adverse. Each of those has a slightly different meaning. Unqualified is always what you're going for. Basically, that's the auditor saying, everything you put on this report, I don't have I feel like is in good shape. I don't have any concerns. I don't have any questions past everything you showed me. So I'm giving you an unqualified approval. Qualified is, most would consider that, or some would consider that, a failure. We don't tend to look at qualified as a pass or fail situation. Essentially, that just means that somewhere along the line during that audit or that report, there were some amount of controls or evidence that perhaps didn't meet the auditor's standards for sort of rising to the occasion of showing that security to there. And then disclaimer adverse, those are a little bit more toward the, hey, yeah, maybe y'all didn't do so great on this, but we personally haven't seen that from any auditors. We don't expect many people do, but those are there as well. The second part is going to be your management assertion, and this is going to be the actual facts and assertions or statements that the organization itself, so you as the business, have made, basically telling the auditor, this is what we want tested, and this is what we claim to be from a security standpoint. After that, it's far more, basic information that you'd expect. As a SOC 2 report is really intended to be passed or given on to your clients as proof for, for your security strength. So things like detailed descriptions of systems of service, selected trust service categories, showing the tests of your controls and the results of those tests, and then any other additional technical information, which really that's the strength of a SOC 2 report, is being able to skip a lot of those security questionnaires and things like that. And most companies would much rather read over your SOC 2 report than send over half a dozen security questionnaires asking about your cryptography strength or your DLP rules or things like that, where a SOC 2 report is going to have all that covered.
I knew you'd have a lot to say on that one.
Oh, yeah.
I just wanted one of the few things I wanted to add about that I mean, I feel like you did a very, very thorough job there as expected. But one of the few things I want to add is another thing you'll see on the report is some of the things that you'll be expected to provide, like the management assertion, but also a few relevant details like complementary user entity controls, which is going to be any control that you rely on your customers to implement, such as like if for Dropbox, they have user access controls, but they're expecting their customers to apply those. They can't know the roles of individual users within their customer organizations and apply those controls themselves. That's going to be reliant on the customer to apply those controls in order to protect their data. Additionally, you're also going to be expected to include whatever complementary subservice organization controls there are. So this is going to be essentially whatever is a relevant vendor, you think, especially stuff like cloud service providers. So that stuff you'll be expected to list on there as well, and that will be taken into account in the audit as well.
And to kind of follow up on that as well, and I think maybe something I kind of glossed over, it is definitely worth noting that, I mentioned those 5 principles, right? Those trust service criteria. It's important to note that not all of those have to be covered in every report as well. So not every report is going to have, not going to cover the availability, the processing integrity, and the confidentiality and the privacy, if those things don't apply to your business. So ultimately, it really comes down to how you scope that report in terms of what it's going to be able to show or provide to your clients as well.
And before we move on, something I feel like we should have mentioned at the top here is if you've potentially been in an organization that's gone through SOC 2 before, or you've flirted with it before in the past, you may be familiar with that term, the trust services principles, and that may be a term you're familiar with. That's the old verbiage. Now it's the trust services criteria. If you hear or see them used either way, they are interchangeable essentially. It's just old language. Now new language is going to be that TSC, that trust service criteria. So don't be confused by that. It's just a simple change from AICPA.
It's taken me a bit to change the words for sure. I wound up doubling back a few times.
Well, thanks for that. That was really good, Corey. So I know scoping the report seems to be pretty important. Can you, explain to everyone, how do you go about deciding the scope of the report?
I think I'll start with that because I think me and Corey are going to actually have some interesting differing thoughts to give here. So there's different ways you can talk about scoping the report. There's going to be different things you need to think about. There's going to be time frame, need, and then also what TSCs you need to fulfill as well. And it's going to be depending on each organization and really specifically your customer base as well. If you look at the TSCs, you're going to have that security, that common criteria that everyone has to do, kind of baseline standard. You know you're going to have to do that. But it's all, in my opinion, really good stuff, and it maps over to a lot of other standards very well. Anyways, it's stuff like risk assessments, access controls, change management, risk mitigation, all core stuff. But then you look and you also have availability, processing integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. And if you're familiar with a lot of the core pillars of cybersecurity, you'll notice that it kind of looks like a blown out version of the CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. And really, that's so that way you can, because some of those are optional, you can provide a little bit more specificity in your needs. Just because depending on the organization, you may want different TSCs, but you don't want to overburden yourself. So if you are an organization that regularly handles financial reports, you're probably going to want that confidentiality TSC. Your customers are probably going to expect that. Same with the processing integrity TSC. But you may not necessarily need the privacy one, or if you are a company that is very consumer facing, you're probably going to want that privacy one to prove that you protect PII, but you may not necessarily need that processing integrity one. If you're a cloud service provider, something like that, or you do some kind of continuous deliverability, you're probably going to want that or need that availability TSC. So you get these core principles are broken out a little bit to allow you to get those specifics that you're going to need for your customer base, while not overburdening yourself with too many extra controls. And then additionally, one thing that I think is really important is the time frame, is understanding your organization's time frame, and determining, especially if you're going for a type 2, what kind of window you need. Are you going to do the 3, the 6, the 9, the 12? Depending on your regulatory status, if you're a financial institution, you may need a type 2 with a full 12-month window. It's just going to depend on what your customers demand, what customers you hope to work with, and what, again, depending on the industry work and what the regulators require for you. So I think that's a very overlooked part of the scoping process, is figuring out what window you need for your type 2 report specifically.
Yeah, I would actually agree with that for sure. But yeah, no, I think you did a great job covering that. It's definitely, I think, the most important, not the most important, but the most unique thing about SOC 2 and it being an attestation rather than, a very prescriptive style of certification, is it really allows that ultimate flexibility, which is why, especially here in the US, that SOC 2 is so prevalent. It allows the context of the organization to decide what's important to them. And not only they get to decide what's important to them, but they get a better understanding of their own business and their own practices by following this process, going through and saying, okay, maybe we'll try to do all of them. We want to do everything. We want to have the biggest, bestest SOC 2 report anybody can have. Well, when you go through that process and you start looking at the controls and trying to see what kind of value you're providing and how SOC 2 is going to apply to you, it's going to be pretty quickly apparent that not only is it about what you want to test with a SOC 2, so scoping isn't necessarily about what you want to be included. It's what needs to be included. It is what is applicable. And I think that for me is one of the best things to take away from SOC 2 is it only provides and tests what is applicable to your business, whereas a lot of certifications may have, since they are so prescriptive, may have a lot of things, it may have a lot of requirements that you have to meet to become certified, but don't mean absolutely anything to your business, or your company, or your client's security. They're just a checkbox. So ultimately, some of those things, depending on the organization, depending on the certification, can wind up being kind of a waste of time and resources. Again, it's obviously all within the context of the organization, but that ultimate flexibility and the approach to scoping, I think, is one of the best parts about SOC 2 and why it's so unique.
Yeah, and I wanted to add, as I was thinking there and listening to your input as well, is we keep saying organization and business, and that's what you're going to find for the majority of SOC 2 reports, is that they're going to be for the totality of a business organization. But where SOC 2 also shines is with that specificity of how you can break out the individual TSCs. You can get separate SOC 2 reports for individual services you provide. And then you can have individual TSC requirements for each one of those as well. So if you're a large organization or you have multiple services, and you have one that you might need to have 3 or 4 TSCs, you can do that. And then if you only need to get like a security and a privacy for another part of your business, a different service you provide, you can do that as well, and just not and enclave it off, so you don't have to provide. You don't have to overburden the entirety of the organization. You can just limit those extra controls to one fraction of your business. You can look at an example of that as a very easy to find example is Google. Google Cloud and Google Workspace have different SOC 2 reports with different requirements. It's less common, definitely, on the smaller organizations, but it is a thing that you can think about as you start to expand your service offerings.
Absolutely. That's really good input. I think you're muted, Kylie.
I'm sorry. So I know you both talked about a difference between type 1 and type 2 report earlier. I assume one is probably more expensive than the other, right?
Oh, yeah. just to put simply, definitely. So yeah, so I would say, so generally speaking, that type 2 is going to be a much larger engagement. So it's going to be more expensive. So with the type 1, as we mentioned before, it's really that snapshot of the company, that freeze frame, the picture in time, tell us what you do, how you're secure, rather than saying prove it or observing those things. So, typically, small, mid-sized companies, it could range anywhere from, $7,500 on the cheaper side, maybe even $15,000 just for the audit alone. That's not including the actual discovery process, evidence gathering, internal assessment. Total costs for a type 1, again, can range, from our experience, for larger businesses, really can scale anywhere from like $20,000 to $60,000 from start to finish. Those are on the larger side. Obviously, smaller and mid-sized, there's definitely cost savings to be had, especially if you bring in a third-party organization to help with some of those internal assessments. They can drastically cut down the time it takes to complete these, and really, really streamline the process. So ultimately cutting down a lot of those costs. Type 2, however, is, as Matt mentioned clearly earlier, is very much sort of an annual process, where most of the time these reviews are over a period of 9 months to a year. I think technically the minimum observation period, so just the observation period, I believe, is 3 months. It's very uncommon to actually see that, though. So we generally, if we're trying to price out a range, small to mid-size, we're generally looking for $12,000 to $20,000 just for the audit. Again, as we mentioned, larger organizations, and when you start including all the things like the internal assessments, evidence gathering, and whatnot, it really can range quite a bit. But $30,000 on the very, very low end for a small company, or even all the way up to maybe $100,000 for your big name organizations, 1,000 plus with many divisions all around the company. And as we mentioned before, scope obviously has a huge part to do with that. So it really is kind of difficult to put a dollar amount down without a question, or without context in an organization. But typically I would say between a SOC 1 or a type 1 and a type 2, you're probably looking at maybe I'd say a 60% increase from a 1 to a 2, just on average round numbers.
When you're talking about price, you're generally talking about trying to determine which is the better value of the two.
True.
so I think that the logical place to take that to next is then, what is the value of each report, and why should you choose the more pricier SOC 2 Type 2 over Type 1? And what is the value you get out of each for their price points? And I think Type 1 can be great if you are if you're a very new business, you don't have a mature security or posture, and you need something to satisfy customers that you have and are working on building a security posture. Especially if you have customers that are asking about that kind of stuff. You may not be ready to yet to fully implement a SOC 2 Type 2 report. You just may not. You may be too young of a company to be there for that, but it's a good step in that direction to show we are serious about this. We're working there. We're not there yet, but we're getting towards that point. However, there's plenty of businesses, especially on the larger end, that just aren't going to accept the Type 1 report. There's going to be some companies, especially like in finance, that they will not be able to work with you because of regulations if you don't have a SOC 2 Type 2 report. So another middle ground there is potentially to do that a little bit quicker and dirtier 3-month window on the SOC 2 Type 2. It's going to be a little bit cheaper. It's going to be a bigger lift than the Type 1 for sure. And again, in some instances, depending on the customers you're working with, they may not like that 3-month window. They may not find it sufficient. But again, it's another great step in that direction. And so I think generally that 3-month window SOC 2 Type 2 is one of the better values to have, because I think you're going to if you are a young organization that doesn't have a mature security posture, I think it's a great way to show that you're serious, and it's not a huge turnaround on a time commitment. If you are serious about it, you could probably get it done in 4 or 5 months. But you really have to hustle with that for sure.
Yeah, I was going to say that. And then it's sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, but I want to make it very clear that that 3-month window Matt's talking about is the observation period. So essentially, that's the minimum amount of time that you have to be able to show those controls over time actually working and producing the results you want. That is not, hey, we want a SOC 2 Type 2 all the way to here's my report.
If you're trying to go for all 5 TSCs, it's probably going to be too much of an ask for almost any organization to do it that quickly. But if you're just trying to get that security one down, that common criteria, I mean, I think for some organizations it's probably doable, and that could be another good intermediary step before you expand it out to a longer observation period. Most organizations consider a Type 2 report good for a full year. So if you get that first one out really quickly, that little 3-month one, you can kind of help to set up your organization and then prepare maybe 6-9 months down the road, go to one of the longer 9-12 month windows that a lot of the bigger organizations expect you to have.
And to kind of follow up on that as well, I know Matt did talk quite a bit about that, that 3-month period, that shorter, real, quick, fast and hurry, Type 2s, and those are great. But as you mentioned, it can be kind of like stressful. There is a bit of drain on the organization for sure. So kind of looking at that specific style or that specific instance, I say that's firmly in that getting into medium-sized organization territory where that's going to be the most feasible, where you're in your most small but efficient kind of manner. And I say that because I think it's important not to discount a Type 1 report as well. Type 1 reports, I very, very much have their very important place in time. And I think they're an awesome tool, again, especially when we're talking about value, what you're able to get, what you're able to put out and get to your prospective clients and customers fairly quickly. I think it's a really, really great option. And as he said, it could be even not necessarily just for smaller organizations, but even potentially for larger organizations that are perhaps working on new products or new divisions, or just generally new service offerings. I think those Type 1 reports are a really, really fantastic tool to sort of get an overall picture of the things you're doing, how you're handling your data, how you're handling security. Again, to really understand it from a bird's eye view before moving, implementing additional controls and kind of building out things further and working toward that Type 2 report. So I definitely think there's some good value to be had in the type 1 as well.
Right. And I think it's going to be a lot of it's going to be individual assessment of what you as an organization think you're going to be capable of handling that early on. Because if you're going for a type 1 or a type 2 3-month window, again, you're probably not a super mature organization from a security posture standpoint. So can you do the turnaround of standing up all these controls and getting that 3-month window set up? Or will it be better to start at a type 1 and then work your way up to the 6, 9, 12-month window on a type 2? It's going to be, because as Corey said, that type 2 is going to be, even that 3-month window is going to be a lot more stress on you. So it's going to really require you to understand your own your own internal organization, how much stress and burden do you want to put on them?
Absolutely.
Awesome, great. So I just have one more question for you guys, and then we can move on to the Q&A. So I know there's a SOC 2 and there's also an ISO 27701. Why should you choose one over the other?
Yeah, I can take a quick stab at that one as well, because that's actually something we get asked about quite a lot for some of our clients, since we personally deal a lot with both. Do a lot of SOC 2 and do a lot of 27001 as part of our specialty. So one of the first things we always ask, or we always get asked, is, do I do SOC 2 or do I do 27001? Aren't they kind of the same? Which one is better? So I'm glad you're asking that, because we get a lot on that. Really, the biggest difference, besides, obviously one is a certification, one is attestation, is really the scope of what you're trying to achieve by pursuing them. So SOC, as we've mentioned, is a framework. It's far more flexible. It reviews your company over time and offers an opinion on this nice, neat little report. It's a fantastic resource, like I said, for getting through questionnaires, things like that. But it's not a certification. With 27001, which is, by the way, is a far more internationally recognized certification rather than SOC 2, which is primarily North America, is far more prescriptive. And I did talk about this earlier when we were sort of talking about so how to, like, SOC 1 and SOC 2 are different, or what's included in a report. I did mention a few times how it's not so prescriptive and so more flexible. 27001 is one of those prescriptive certifications where, instead of like SOC 2, where you can say, hey, just show us that you take care of your data, just show us that you take care and handle your data within a way that works for your organization. 27001 doesn't care about what works for your organization. They care about doing it their way. They want to see that each and every individual one of these points is handled. Obviously, scoping is a part of that. If you're a fully remote business, you don't have to show that you have fire extinguishers and battery backups. But 27001 and SOC 2 do share a lot of the same backbone. So they share a lot of the same principles, share a lot of the same controls. Ultimately, they're looking to achieve the same goal. But really, I think, as far as like which one to choose over the other, it can be a little bit tough. A lot of times it comes down to what your clients are asking for. What are their requirements? Do they want to see a certification? Do they want to know in specific detail the kind of things you're doing? Or do they want an overview where they can decide whether they think that's good enough? Where, as 27001 says, we know you're doing exactly these things. SOC 2 is more of an auditor's perspective, saying, yeah, we think they're good enough. So it really comes down to having that discussion with the team, the organization, and seeing what's more feasible or what's more important to you.
Yeah, I just want to reiterate, I think a lot of it has to come down to what the customers you are working with or plan to work with are going to want. The SOC 2 Type 2 report is going to give them more detail to look at. They may want to know more about your organization's security posture. They're going to get that from that report. Whereas the ISO, it's just going to be a quick little, yep, ISO certified. And if your customers don't care to investigate particulars of the controls, they don't want to spend that time doing that. That ISO badge is probably what they're going to want to see. They just want to know that you've met these certain criteria, and move on with it, move on the sales process and get the relationship started. There's going to be some organizations that either because of personnel or because of regulations, they might need to take a deeper dive into your security posture, and they're going to want to read that report for specific sections to see how you do certain things. So again, it's just going to come down to customers. So you need to know your business's orientation, where you are currently, where you want to go, and what clients you want to pursue, and that's the best way to figure that kind of thing out. See what other people in your industry are doing, what they're being asked to do, what your clients are asking of them, what your clients are asking of you, and use that to really figure out which of the two is better for you. But another thing, like as Corey said, that you should also think about is what are your goals as far as growth, because if it's international, like he was saying, the International Standards Organization, ISO 27001, is much more universally recognized as opposed to APAC's SOC 2 report, so it's going to come down to what do you think you want to do for your business?
Yeah.
Great, thanks guys for that. So that's a wrap for all the questions I had, but now we can move on to the Q&A for everyone else. I have a question from Kristen. Why are SOC 2 audits performed by CPA firms?
Yeah, so this is one I remember learning about SOC 2 that I was actually really surprised to see. And I had the same question pretty much immediately. It seems a bit odd. When you start to break it down, it does make a little bit of sense. Honestly, it's not as complicated as you think it might be. So AICPA is the Association of International Certified Professional Accountants. So they're the ones that have created and actually codified SOC 2 as it is. So there's your first one. They're the one that have standardized the attestation standards. And once you start to think about it from this perspective, it makes a little more sense. But CPAs are actually pretty good subject matter experts when it comes to risk management. Again, maybe coming from a financial institution, there's a little bit of different context, but leaning on that expertise to move into the cybersecurity domain. Being as SOC 2 is not so prescriptive, they just have to understand the risks that these controls or this data poses, and how well is that risk mitigated. CPA is actually pretty well suited for that.
Great. Do we have any more questions before we wrap this up? Oh, we have one more. How long does SOC 2 usually take to complete?
That's going to really depend on each organization and which report you're going for, type 1 or type 2, and also the scoping in general. For a type 1, I think it's fair to say you can probably get that turned around in 4 to 6 months, pretty typically. I'd say that's fair. As long as you are taking it seriously. As long as you take it seriously, you're doing a readiness assessment, gap assessment, remediating any of those gaps, it should be pretty easy to do in 4 to 6 months. The actual audit itself only takes, how long does the type 1 audit usually take? Was it 5 days?
Yeah,
typically?
usually between for a type 1, yeah.
Whereas with the type 2, you've got the whole observation period. Again, depending on how it's scoped out, those are going to take significantly longer time for most organizations. I think even for a 3-month window, I think for most organizations, it's probably going to take about 6 months to get that done, because you're going to need that lead time to get the controls in place, and then you're going to need that 3-month observation period to actually assess those controls are working properly. But then I think it kind of scales like that for all the windows. So really for a year window, ideally it should probably take about 15 months to get through that, give or take. I think, again, for all these windows, it depends on how quick your organization can be to turn around to get these controls in place and get up and running on all that. What would be your thoughts, Corey?
I think that's a good way to look at it. So typically we try to, if we're doing a SOC 2 type 2, we try to really set that expectation for a year. And we think that's sort of the best overall round way to do it, especially because these type 2 reports generally are something you're going to want to do annually, since they are an annual report. So obviously, that can be reduced depending on context and what you need. But typically we like to set the expectation of that 9 months to a year bar. And I think you hit it perfectly on the type 1. That 4 to 6 months is usually where we'd like to be comfortable with.
You're muted again, Kylie.
I gotta get used to this, man. But I was just saying, I guess that's it for the questions, so we can wrap this webinar up. Oh, that's my phone with the timer. So thank you so much for joining us, everyone. This is a wrap for our Webinar Wednesday series. Follow us on LinkedIn for the latest updates on our next one. We do one every 2 weeks. This webinar will be live. The recording will be live on YouTube by the end of the week, so be on the lookout for that. You can also visit our website at cyberdatapros.com for more information.
All right, thank you all very much for joining us.
Thanks for joining us. Yeah.
Thank you. Bye.
All right, bye.